Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Automation Hour. So thrilled that you could all join us here today. So as usual, we'll go through a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, we've got all the lines muted, so you can certainly post your questions either here in the questions widget or in the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community group. We are recording this and we will be posting that after the session to our YouTube channel. As always, we invite you to follow us wherever you like. We're on the Trailblazer community. We have a website, and we are also now on Twitter at Automation Hour. So, of course, we have a lot of great content coming up. So we're pretty jam-packed here, and we invite you to go to the Automation Hour website and sign up for all of our upcoming sessions that you see here. It proves to be a jam-packed 6 months for sure. And of course, we cannot bring you Automation Hour without the support of our sponsors. So we certainly want to say thank you first to Active Campaign, who has been a new sponsor for us in the last year, as well as our other sponsor, Concrete.io, that has been with us since the beginning. So speaking of the beginning, we want to shout out our co-founders that began Automation Hour, 5 or 6 years ago now? David Litton, Jen Lee, and of course Rakesh. And of course, we are now your co-hosts. You've got Rakesh and myself. So with that, we will turn things over to our presenter for today, the amazing Linda Kitty.
Thank you. So a quick introduction of myself. I'm currently the lead developer at Travel Centers of America. I co-lead the Cleveland Developer Group, as well as help organize Cleveland Salesforce Saturday. And on the side for fun, I facilitate a Girls Who Code Club at one of the local libraries here in the Cleveland area. I have 10 certifications and all the badges except one super badge that I'm saving for when I have less fear of JavaScript. You're welcome to follow me as well on Twitter. My handle is LibuPanda, or connect with me on LinkedIn. And with that, we will get into our topic for today. So our use case for this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, or whatever time zone you're in, is to provide our internal Salesforce users with a simple way to provide feedback, no matter what page they're in Salesforce. So using the Lightning page layouts, anywhere from a generic page or a general page to specific tabs or subtabs. We want to make sure it's easy for them to give that feedback. We want to make sure it's easy for the admin to set that up and add the ability for that feedback in any page. And we want to make sure that reporting and review of that feedback is done regularly. To that end, our basic process, which I didn't get a chance to flowchart out, but is that basically the admin is going to add that user feedback mechanism to the Lightning page for the users. The user is going to fill it out, provide a rating and comment, click and submit. And then our Salesforce team is going to review weekly the reports of all that collected feedback to use in our planning meetings and to figure out whether we need to contact users with training or make changes to Salesforce. So obviously there's some configuration we need to do to get this going. So basically we have to create a custom object to store that feedback. We have to create and activate a screen flow to actually capture that feedback. We're going to add that flow to one or more Lightning pages. We're going to create a report, and then we're going to add a report subscription for the team to actually receive that. So the custom object. It's a fairly simple custom object. In this case, I'm calling it user feedback. Its plural label is also user feedback, and just noting that it does start with a vowel. I tend to set the name field on this to an auto number. So I used UF for user feedback and started at a 0. And I did check the boxes when I created this originally to allow reporting and launch the new custom tab wizard. In the tab wizard, though, after I choose everything, I do make it hidden for all profiles except the system admin, and I'll add access back later. I have 3 custom fields that I'm going to add to this custom object. Feedback item, which is text of about length 50, more or less depending on your needs, but I try not to use really long names for stuff. This field is going to hold how I describe where the location is that I'm asking for this feedback, or the subject of the feedback. A rating to hold a number, so a simple 1 character number integer field. Comments, and I'm gonna let my users write as much as they want for their comments, so I'm using a long text area. We look back in an org, my user feedback objects right here. Like I said, it's a very basic setup, and my fields on it. As I mentioned, I have comments, which is long text. I have my feedback item, which is just text, and my rating, which is a simple number. The other piece you may want to do is set up your page layout at that point, so that it's in a way that's going to be easy for you to review should you need to go into the records. So I tend to group the main fields at top and provide a separate section for the long comments so that it can take the full column width. So besides that, once I have the object set up, testing by creating a record or two that I then delete when I'm done. And then going back to the other profiles so that I can give read and create access to the profiles that are going to provide me feedback. I'm not going to make the tab visible for this object. I'm just going to give them read and create on the object. And I can do that either for the profiles or by creating like a feedback provider permission set that I can then assign to the users that can provide feedback, or to all users. So the actual flow then is the next step. So setting up the flow, this is kind of the quick picture of what the flow looks like when we're done. So, 3 simple elements to it. But before we create the elements, we actually have to add one more piece. So that's an input variable. So the input variable, straight variable, I'm calling it feedback item. It's a straight text, and you want to make sure you check that available for input box. That way you'll be able to designate what it is prior to the start of the flow when you're placing it in your page layouts. The first element is a screen. I named it feedback 1. 3 pieces to the screen. The first is display text. It includes the feedback item input variable within that text. So I'm saying, please give me feedback about this thing. And word it in a way that works good for your users, helps to encourage them to provide you feedback. So in my case, I said, please provide feedback about and I list what, I have what the item is. So together we can make your Salesforce experience better. I use a slider for the rating where I have 1 is low and 5 is high. And then obviously text for the free-form comments. You want to use a label for that. That also helps encourage your users to provide you comments, or fits with asking for the rating. So I say, please expand on your rating or provide additional feedback that you have. The second element in our flow is actually creating the user feedback records. So for this, I set my label as create user feedback. You're only creating 1 record. You want to set these as separate resources using literal values. You're using that custom object that you created, and you're mapping your field. So the rating, if you use a slider, please recall that you have to specify not just the field you created in your screen, but the value of it. Your feedback item is that input variable you used, and then the comments are the comments that were provided on the screen by the user. Then lastly, within the flow is my second screen. Just thanking them for providing the feedback. After you set up your flow, don't forget to save and activate, and always make sure you test your flow. Really quickly jumping back to an org. I will jump into the flow so we can see it more up close. Like I said, it's a fairly simple, and you can turn on the auto layout if you want. It's better on the screen if I don't. So as mentioned, that variable is right here. This particular one, when I built this one, I called it feedback placement instead of just feedback item. But again, you can see it's available for input. That's the biggest important piece for this. And then each of our elements. And yes, I like to make my text in pretty colors to help it stand out. Again, just text. The slider component is the only one that has a little bit different setup. So you've got your API name, your label, the range, and you put the maximum first and the minimum second. If you don't want it to slide by single increments, so if you wanted to use a 1 to 10 and have a 2 range, you can change the step size if you want, as well as the size of the slider. So my step size is 1. You can set a default value. I always started at the highest value and let the users bring it down. The create record element is pretty straightforward. You're just mapping those 3 fields. When it writes the record, it does capture the user as the created by. Just keep that in mind. And then of course that last screen, I try to make sure that my font for any message I include on the last screen matches the font message I had on the first screen, so it looks continuous and consistent. So that's the easy flow part. Back to our slides. So once we've built the flow and you're thinking about where you're going to use this, you really need to plan ahead. What places do you want to get feedback about in your UI from your users? How long should you continue to ask for that feedback? You know, do you want to keep it up for a month, a couple weeks? How often and who should be included when you review that feedback? So make sure you're thinking not only of getting the feedback, but also what you're going to do with it. Don't overwhelm your users with feedback requests. Don't stick this on every page you have. It's too much for the users to have at once. Keep it to only a few places at a single time and occasionally move it, get feedback about other things. It's great if you just made a change to the UI to ask your users for their feedback at that point about it, you know, for a few weeks. You know, are they liking the changes? If you're reviewing an object currently, or you've heard rumblings about a page layout, that's another great place to put it so you can get more honest, timely, as well as detailed feedback from the users while they're using the system. Plan where you're going to put it on the page, determine how prominent you want it. You know, don't interfere with their work, but make sure they know it's there. Be prepared to review that feedback and seriously consider it. Determining what you're going to call the space is also important when you're preparing to put in that, because you want it to make sense to the users as well as to you, so you know exactly what place they were talking about, especially when you're putting out 3 or 4 of these requests within the different pages of your org. So adding it on any Lightning page, the home page, a record page, or an app page is fairly simple. I usually, for record pages, I actually go to that record or I go to the home page. You're editing the record page through the edit page. You're dragging the standard flow component, placing it on the page, selecting your flow, and making sure you enter that feedback item. Again, always save and test it as a user as well as yourself. So just a quick show of that. So here's my actual feedback placement in this one. I will just show this one. So on my edit page, I have my flow component right here. And we can see I chose which flow I'm using. I'm leaving it at 1 column and I'm putting in the feedback item. In this case, I'm just calling it account page. As I mentioned, I can also put it on my home page. I don't have it there today, so I'm going to just really quickly come here, go to my home page and just show that placement. So I just have the standard default home page here. So I could come here to my setup. Oops, sorry, wrong place. My page setup, edit page. As I mentioned, it's just the flow component. And just click and drag it to where I want to put it on the page. You know, I can put it pretty much anywhere. I have to make sure I choose the flow that I created. So this is my feedback flow. Leaving it at one column, it really doesn't need more than one column. And what's my placement? So, you know, the tab here is called homepage. So I'm just gonna call it homepage. Use some, you know, if you've renamed that tab, use something your user is gonna know. And then obviously you want to save the page, and if you need to activate it, you can quickly activate it as well. And when we go back, it shows right here on the page, and it's fairly simple. You know, my users can change the slide value, and they can say, now I'm missing the approval processes. How can I easily make approvals? And I can't see that. So they can get as lengthy as they want because I gave them a long text field. They click next, and it submits it. They can click finish, and I've left this open so they could provide multiple pieces of feedback at any time. Now, as a regular user, they're not going to be able to see this object, but I can always come in here. My user feedback object is here because as an admin, I have access to that, and I can see my feedback I just provided is right here in the record and available here. As mentioned, whoever creates it, it shows up with the creation. Just so that you're aware, you'll know which users provided it. You know, be smart with how you use that. Back to our slides. So that's the whole flow and how to place it. So reporting is the next big piece. You know, be prepared to act on the feedback, but create a way for you to be able to regularly review it. You're going to use the report type based on that object you created. Salesforce nicely generates this for us. I tend to group rows by the feedback item when I build this report. It makes it a lot easier for me to organize it and track it. I'm going to include the comment and the rating. When I do this report, I tend not to include the user who provided that feedback, so I'm not including the created by at this point. If I find I need it, like it's a user who made a comment that in review, it's determined that maybe we need to reach out to that user and provide them training, or to reach out to the user and get additional information. We can do that a little more discreetly rather than having it in a report that goes around to everyone, especially if it's quickly identifiable who that user might be. I tend to change the summation to an average, so I have an idea of what's my average rating for this page that's out there. Sometimes I'll remove the subtotals and just have but you might want it by subtotal when you have multiple objects, up to you. And the filters, so I like to make sure I have a weekly subscription on this, so I'm going to filter to include all records and use the last 7 days. And then of course we're adding that subscription for weekly. So before I get into final thoughts, so that report, just showing how it's built out. As mentioned, I'm going to pull up the report type that for the object I created of my user feedback. I want to make sure not just that I have the ID column, but that I have the rating that was provided as well as the comments. So my groups, I'm going to add that feedback item so that I can group by that for the report. So right now in the preview, I'm seeing there's multiple ones for the feedback item. And right now, by default, the rating is going to sum. So I can change that to give me an average. And I don't need row counts for this, but you know, I could determine whether I want some both. So something to remember when you change the summary, don't forget to turn off the summary that you aren't using. On my filters, I want to make sure I use all feedback because that way I get the user's feedback and not just mine that I created in my testing. And instead of all time, I'm going to use last 7 days because I'm going to send this report as a subscription out to me each week. So I want to make sure I save it, and I'm actually just going to save and run, and I'm going to call this weekly user feedback. Obviously, you're going to want to choose it to put it in a folder where everyone can access it, not your personal folder. So whatever is available out there for folders where you can share, at least within the team who's going to be reviewing it. So they all have access to it. So the last thing obviously is to set up my subscription for it. I'm going to choose the day of the week. I'm going to have my review. It's great if you do it right on the day that your team meets. So my team meets on Thursdays. So I'm going to run the Thursdays. We meet in the early afternoon. So I'm going to have it run around 12 noon. And obviously I would add the recipients other than myself. But since this is a developer or a guy, I don't have other recipients. And if I wanted to, I could use conditions. So one of the things I like to do with this is only send it to me if there's actually records. So notice that by turning off the record count, I don't have that option to choose for my condition. Kind of something you have to weigh. Do you want to see the record count or don't you? Obviously, if someone's rated something, my average rating is actually going to be greater than 0. So I could actually use that as a condition for myself to do that, and I can then save that for my subscription. And that'll email me out the report each week, and then as a team we can review it and determine, is this something we want to consider for changing the UI for Salesforce? Is it something that we need to provide training for users, or how are we going to interact with our users to help improve Salesforce for them? So some final thoughts on the topic. So, when you create this new user feedback mechanism, make sure you communicate it to your users, let them know it's available and encourage them to use it. Reiterate to them that you're very serious about partnering with them to improve their Salesforce experience. And then follow through on all that feedback received. It really goes a long way to really help solidify that you are serious about helping partner with them as you improve Salesforce. This deck, and I also put together a short 4-page step-by-step instructions for building out this user feedback flow. And I will share those on the Trailblazer community group for Salesforce Automation Hour, so you can access them anytime you like. Speaking of feedback, thinking of some alternatives, besides having this flow within the user page, having a specific chatter group, encouraging your users to use the tag feedback when they use chatter to give feedback. Holding office hours or drop-in style meetings for users is another great way to collect feedback from them. Having a specific email address for them to send feedback to at any time. The advantage of that means you could even use email the case to help organize, collect them, and possibly help lead you through your change management. And remember, this flow can go on any Lightning page, the record, the home, and if you have a community, you could even set up the correct permissions to allow your users of your community to, or your Experience Cloud pages to provide you feedback. So at that point, that is the bulk of my presentation. If we have any questions, I'm open to answering them.
Yes, we absolutely do. So thanks for that run through, Linda. So let me do a quick refresh on the Trailblazer community to see if we have any questions there. And while I'm waiting for that to reload, we'll get the questions in our question widget here. First up, we have a question and a comment from Dominic. So he says, thanks for sharing the solution, Linda. He wants to know, have you thought about automatically capturing the record ID or the object if you put the flow on specific record pages, and would that be easy to do? And his comment was, P.S. I like that you default to the highest rating.
So collecting, I imagine we can definitely collect the record ID when you're using it in a record on a record page, because you can specify that record ID with the capital I as an input variable, which is automatically then passed. I feel like on the home, if you're going to end up using it on a home page or an app page, it can become an issue. And as for collecting what the actual object is, again, that would almost have to be an input variable you'd have to create unless you're doing a translation on the first 3 characters of the ID that you're passing.
Awesome. Okay, so then Karthik had a question for us as well. So the way you built it, you have the feedback page show up, and then as soon as they click submit, basically it pops back up and allows them to submit feedback a second time. Is there a way to show the flow for just one time, and so after they provide that feedback, it disappears?
So there's nothing I'm collecting right now to help me limit that. Like, I guess I could potentially add into the flow the ability to check to see if the user's already provided feedback for that particular feedback item. And so then basically instead have it with a page that says, thank you, we already have your feedback type message that doesn't let them give more feedback. I didn't choose to do that because I really want to encourage my users might be in there today, have one thought, be in there another day, have a different thought. And it does once they hit that final submit. When I originally built this, it was before the latest release where you can rewrite the labels on the buttons. So I feel like that could also help a little bit too.
Excellent. Okay, double checking for other questions. One of the questions, and Karthik did pop back in with thank you. So one of the other questions that I had is, you had mentioned, maybe doing an email to case type thing. Did you ever consider linking this to whatever sort of change management you may have if you're doing that inside Salesforce? Or could you do something like that so that this would create essentially a ticket of sorts in whatever sort of ticketing system?
Yeah, I mean, if you're using ticketing directly in Salesforce, it's easy to add another element to create a case record off this fairly simply. I would probably do that after that review. So I really want my team to review these kind of as a whole, and maybe from there we create a simple flow button, flow with a button or something right on that particular object page for the user experience, where we can help send that information over to create a case. Unfortunately, where I'm at, my ticketing system is not in Salesforce, and they have not opened the API to me. So.
Well, that makes it just a little bit difficult for sure.
Yeah.
So have you considered grabbing any other data about maybe the user that is creating this, so you could maybe do some reporting on, like, by department or team or anything like that?
Yeah, so I don't believe the report will let me right off the bat, but we can look at it real quick. To come here and edit. I don't know if there's any user fields right in here, but if there are, that's great. But if not, we would have to then create. Yeah, so most likely what we'd have to do for that is create a custom report type where we're able to add in more data about the created by user. I feel like that isn't that difficult to do and could really help you make, a really more robust report about, especially when you have an account object that's shared across your organization to know, maybe your service users need some stuff, but your sales users need other things.
Great. Okay, so I will put out one more call for questions. I think we've gotten through all of them. I think you did such a great job explaining it. There's not a whole lot of questions left. You've covered all the bases for sure. So yeah, if anybody does have any other questions related to Flow or specifically about Linda's process here, please feel free to throw them in chat. In the interim, I'd like to give a shout out for a couple of upcoming items. Number one, if anyone in the community is following Andy Engine Utkin and Terry Miller, they are starting a Flow office hours. So I'm going to throw the website for their new Flow office hours into the chat here. Their first event is going to be February 11th. And then also for all of the Flow fanatics that we have on the call today, since of course that is why you are here with us, there is something called Flow Fest that is coming soon. There are a number of people, I think, organizing and sponsoring it. Our very own Rakesh Gupta is going to be on the judging panel, along with a lot of other pretty famous names in the Flow space. And so I will also throw a FlowFest registration link out there. It's going to be like a 1 hour long hackathon style event, and you can sign up to either participate or spectate. So we'll throw that in the chat as well in case anyone is available for that. I believe it's February 23rd is when that's taking place. So some fun stuff coming up in February. So we'll do one more double check here to make sure we've gotten everybody's questions. Oh, Matthew gave you a shout out. He said, thank you, Linda. This was really great. So Matthew, we're thrilled that you could join today. Thank you for being here. I'm definitely excited for this, and there are a couple of places I would love to be able to put this in. So doing one last double check here, and it looks like we have everybody from the community taken care of as well. So with that, I think we'll give everybody a little bit of their day back, but we all appreciate you joining, and we will see you all again for our next session on February 8th. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.